Well, hello there. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of Telile 24/7. I'm your host, Adam Cook. On this week's show, we look back at some special remembrance ceremonies that were held recently in Richmond County, and we look ahead to this Sunday's Trans Day of Remembrance here in Cape Breton, and we have a special guest interviewer for that segment, so make sure you tune in a little later on. We're also going to launch our Where Are They Now series here on Telile 24/7, and our first guest is a former radio personality from the Strait area who is now the Deputy Mayor of the city of Miramichi in New Brunswick. And we'll also take a look at potential development on a popular Isle Madame look-off. But we begin with the latest on the reaction to Hurricane Fiona in our area, and in particular some road washouts in the community of Oban, just outside of River Bourgeois, that have led residents there to demand action to repair the roads leading into and out of their community. Here is Richmond Warden Amanda Mumbrequette speaking at this week's Committee of the Whole meeting for Richmond Municipal Council in Arishat to update the situation in Oban and where the county can go from here.
So, certainly for myself, I've had outreach from a number of residents in Oban who are dealing with road washouts that go way beyond the inconvenience of rerouting and are creating sometimes dangerous situations with regards to responding emergency vehicles because some of the road is impassable. And certainly Hurricane Fiona exacerbated the problem, and the rains we've had since have not helped either. So at this time, I guess I'd be just seeking feedback from council. I know in the past we've written sort of letters of encouragement to the provincial government to deal with particular problem areas, which gives us, I think, puts the voice of council behind it, and I guess seeks out council's support to potentially writing another such letter, requesting at least a timeline on the fix, because certainly right now it appears that there is no timeline, that the holdup is related to availability of gear and other contracts that have been taking the attention of the contractor who awarded the tender. But I guess looking for some feedback from council on whether or not we could add our voice for support.
We've sent letters from different areas throughout the county, and this would be, this is no different. This is a safety issue. More than, like you said, more than accessibility, it's about safety as well. So certainly I would support you writing a letter to the Minister of Public Works, to voice our concerns.
Okay.
Particularly with the lack of timeline, I think is
Right.
bigger. That's always a bigger concern to me. I always understand that there are time factors, but if you don't even have a general timeline, then you're really at a loss.
Yeah, I would agree. And if we're going to send a letter, I think it has to go to the province. It's, on the ground level down here, we can only do so much. But again, they are the ones that ultimately push the button and say go. So, I would support sending a letter to the province and asking for a timeline.
With council support, Warden Mumbrequette will now send a letter on behalf of the municipality to the Minister of Public Works for Nova Scotia, Kim Masland. After the vote, Warden Mumbrequette thanked her fellow councillors for their support of the people of the Oban area.
Okay, that motion is carried, and I just want to thank council for their support on that. I know this is a pressing issue for the people who are living in Oban, and I'll be happy to be able to report back that we are supportive of their efforts to get more attention to that.
Now, if you watch Telile 24/7 regularly, or you're just tuning in to Telile Community Television's regular municipal council broadcasts, you might know that the Babin's Hill look-off just outside of West Arishat has been a key topic of discussion in recent months. Municipal councillors from Isle Madame would like to see some action taken there to improve access to the Babin's Hill look-off for locals and visitors alike. However, as you're going to see in the upcoming council footage from this Monday's Committee of the Whole meeting, it's not as easy as a simple snap of the fingers. You're going to hear in a few moments from both Isle Madame municipal councillors, Michael Digdon and Sean Samson, as well as District 3 councillor Melanie Samson, Warden Amanda Mumbrequette, the Director of Finance for the municipality, Jason Martel, and as well the Director of Public Works, Chris Boudreau. But first of all, here is Richmond CAO Troy McCulloch to explain the latest developments concerning the Babin's Hill look-off.
Those of you that are familiar with the site know that there's the big rock that's there as well that can either be incorporated or removed as part of the process. But right now, before we get too deep into the weeds with engaging other people, we just wanted to make sure that we had the scope and understood the extent of the development that council was happy with before we started digging into finding out numbers and hours and pieces of equipment that we would need to make this thing happen. You know, we have natural limitations with the drop-off, and we have other limitations by the intersection to the west. So looking at that diagram, we were just looking for your feedback to say, okay, start with this line and going this far out, and then we'll come back to you with some actual numbers and try and have it ready for capital in 2023.
Are we looking at building a wooden platform deck to put in on location there, or were we looking more at just putting a rocked
Like it is
gravel?
now, like the gravel it is now?
Correct.
Okay, well, again, that's up to you. I believe the deck boarding came from the recommendation of the plan a couple of years ago. What year was that? That was,
It was 2016. That was just part of the tourism project. We just put that out there as background. It's not that we're recommending any particular development, but that's what was planned for that site back then. You know, essentially, it was just the wooden structure. I don't think there was any expansion of the area, so parking would still have been very limited. But it was a, large wooden deck and a look-off at that time.
We're talking about an expansion of parking where it's currently at, then the wooden deck and whatever further towards the intersection.
Yeah, the deck that essentially was just included, just to brief council, and in the event council wanted to do something similar.
Right.
Or altogether different, but, initially, I think we were talking about expanding parking, and not just parking, the functional use of the space, I guess. So I'm just trying to get a sense of what we might want to look at, and then we can get some firmer numbers, so when we talk about it during budget, we can give you a better idea what it might cost to do whatever you feel appropriate.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't know, it's probably gonna be something that might be multi-stage, but I would be, personally, I would be happy in just seeing the groundwork. I mean, like everything else, wood over time is gonna either rot, break, fall apart. It's another thing we have to worry about. If it breaks or somebody cuts it, then, we have to, it's extra maintenance. Whereas if it's just one big solid ground foundation right now, then I think,
Picnic tables, park benches.
picnic table, park bench, just on a solid, whether we, I guess we poured cement or we just left it, Class A gravel or something that's compacted. I think the cost would be a lot less, and we don't have to worry about maintenance more or less in that regard, for the time being. We could always look at the wooden structure down the road, but.
Yeah. So basically then looking at the costs surrounding that, like, almost like you say, as a stage one, and if there's future development because we are pursuing a broader plan or, some more strategic.
some trail plans.
Right, some trail.
Yeah, and I guess kind of like the, and only because I was down there again last week, but kind of like the look off in Canso. It's got a great, you can pull your car right off.
Yep.
You probably park 8, 10, 15 cars, but it's just a graveled look off.
Right.
Okay.
1 or 2 benches along the edge and, I guess guardrail for protection, but that would be, I think that would be personally, that would be my stage one phase, or phase one, is to just expand the size of it.
Right.
Okay.
But that's basically what we have right now, right? So according to the plan, it does give like adequate space if people park properly for 5 to 7 cars. We have benches there, we have a picnic table there, so, I of course, I love that spot, and I think it's great, but, we're talking about potentially doubling that, or whatever we decide as a council. And so, do we feel the need to expand the parking area by 5 spots and then more seating, at a cost of, like a rough estimate, 25 to 35,000, which we know rough estimates are never high enough, and so I'm just a little concerned. I'm more interested, to be honest, to find out from, through Troy to the staff, like how much of their time would be eaten up by looking at some of those maps that Chris mentioned in his briefing notes to figure out, what would be the quantity of fill that would be required and what would be the normal price for those and those types of pieces, because it may financially just not be something that makes sense, right? It's not like, again, that we drive by there and we see more than 5 to 7 cars parked there at any time. Like, I've driven by and seen 3, but again, and I don't live on Almadam, so please correct me if I'm wrong, if you've seen more than that, but I just wonder how when we have so many other infrastructure projects we need to do, and we have so many other potential tourist projects that have nothing done, you know, there is a lookout there is decent parking, there is something decent for people to sit with. Like, we have a whole bunch of other areas that have nothing, and we're just getting ready to put some plans into place that we're gonna need to fund. So I would hate to waste staff's time gathering all of, you know, if it's amount, you know, I'm expecting it's a decent amount of time to gather that information, if it's not something that we would be putting high on our priorities list above other infrastructure pieces or tourism pieces or recreation pieces that we need to do. That's just
So,
my concern.
I guess that would be something that Chris or Troy would have to answer, but the only thing I would recommend is if Chris plots it out, then, you know, send it out to a local contractor and ask them to stop in and estimate the cost to,
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's as simple as that, I mean,
That's-
it didn't really sound that simple to me as I read it, but again, that's not my area of expertise, so that's why I'm asking.
like, I don't think I would go into, you know, like I say, for stage one or whatever, I don't think I would go into a whole lot of detail other than pinpointed where we would, you know, where Chris feels to expand the location. Unfortunately, you're right, if you actually pulled in and parked straight, you probably get 4 or 5 cars, but you never, one pulls this way and one pulls that way, and the 2 cars are parked sideways, and then anybody else is kind of left either dangling on the road or saying, yeah, you know what, I'll stop the way back or some other time. It just doesn't give you that appropriate, I guess, personal feeling to pull off and,
Yeah, I think nothing short of painted lines are going to stop, are going to control how people park, and even that can be stretched, so.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Remember, unless you got painted lines, people are going to park the way they want to park, and yeah. But going back to what Councillor Digdon said, that's where I would start, to be honest. I hear you, Councillor Samson. So for me, what I would do is probably just contact local contractors and say, here's what we're planning. We want to see how much fill it's going to take, how much construction it's going to take, how much excavation. Give us some sort of rough idea without taking up too much time from our staff, and then just take that number and come back and say, this is going to be, and like you said, Councillor Melanie, most numbers sometimes are low. So if we feel that number is high to begin with, then we really got to take a look at it, right? So.
Can I ask a question, maybe more for our Almadam councillors? So the most pressing issue, is it the amount of parking space, or is it more like impediments to the view, or you know what I mean? Are you worried about tree growth? Like, what's the?
so it's a little of both. So
Okay.
when it was brought to my attention, it was that the tree growth is starting to,
Right.
I guess, alter the view of the whole
Yeah.
harbor. And then the other one was, and I'm just going to say a bus, because last summer that's what happened. A bus pulled in, and then 1 or 2 of the tourists that were there couldn't pull in off the road as well with the bus because it just kind of pulled off, not enough. So then the tourists actually pulled to the side and then looked and then went down the low road and couldn't get a good view and then left. And then it was actually just brought to my attention that you can't even get 2 buses to pull off. So I was like, well, you know, we do own the land. So again, you know, like Councillor Samson said, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time
Yeah.
of staff's, you know, time and energy into it. But if we peg it out, you know, these guys do that for a living. So whether it's one of the, you know, one of the contractors, they
Does
should
that
be able
sound
to.
doable then, Troy? Do you think?
I think it does.
Yeah.
I think it's something we can do, and
Okay.
We would need to hire someone to do a topographical survey to get a reasonable estimate.
Okay.
So we can't just reach out to,
The contractor needs to know the volume of material, which is.
but he would be able to assess that. Like,
A contractor won't do a survey. You need an actual number, so we'd have to expend some money to get a consultant there to do a little bit of survey work for us.
to determine the fill.
To determine the volume. I mean, they could look and take a roundabout guess of what it'll take, but if you're looking for a reasonable number, we would have to go about getting a survey.
To actually budget for.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of slope there, and if you're off by a small margin, it could be a big volume of material, just the way it drops off, so.
and I understand that, however, if the topical survey is gonna cost us more than the smaller margin that we're going to be off, then I'd be willing to say we're, you know, again, these guys do it for a living. I can almost guarantee, and I'll throw names, but I can almost guarantee you that if Peter Cova says it's gonna take 28 loads, you might get 29, but you're not going to get 31 or 32 or 33. And not just him, you know, all the guys in the industry that do it, they're pretty bang on. Again,
I think we have enough to take away right now, though.
Yeah.
The idea of what level we want to
Contractor
go to
estimate.
with stage one.
Great.
And if we take that and come back to us, let us go see what we can find out. And if we have to engage somebody, we'll come back and see you first.
Okay. That sounds good.
Because we have time to get it in before capital.
Yes,
We
that's
have
right.
lots of time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah. Great.
And now we're going to take two very different looks at the word remembrance here in Richmond County and across Cape Breton Island. In just a couple of minutes, you're going to hear some discussion among Richmond Municipal Councillors about Remembrance Day services that were held in Richmond County last week, as well as the unveiling of the Royal Canadian Legion Isle Madame Branch 150's Veterans Banner Project. But before that, here is a special interview about Trans Day of Remembrance, which takes place this Sunday, November 20th, across Cape Breton Island, including a special vigil being held in Sydney on that day. Veronica Merryfield is the head of the Cape Breton Transgender Network. She is speaking with Telile 24/7's special guest interviewer, local LGBTQIA and Two-Spirit activist Taylor Linloff. Here is Taylor speaking to Veronica Merryfield right now.
Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor Linloff, and I'm here with Veronica Merryfield. And we are here today to talk about Transgender Day of Remembrance. Veronica, before we start, can you just tell me about who you are, what you do?
Hi. Veronica Merryfield. It's good to be back. I am the founder of the Cape Breton Transgender Network, and I am just in the process of founding the Nova Scotia Intersex Support Network too. And I do a lot of support and advocacy work within the transgender community.
Veronica, thank you for introducing yourself. Could you please tell me what Transgender Day of Remembrance is?
So Transgender Day of Remembrance started some years ago after the still unsolved murder of a young trans woman. It's a day in the year when we remember the members of our community that have lost their lives. And those numbers have been creeping up over the last couple of years. Last year it was 470 internationally, and those are the ones that are known. This year it's 376. And for the first time in, as far as I can tell, there is a member in that list from Cape Breton.
That's shocking, honestly. For people who don't know, I am actually transgender myself. I am non-binary. And the fact that there's someone from Cape Breton on that list just hits home so hard. That's genuinely scary. We really need to do more. And speaking of which, what are some things that people can do not only to mark Transgender Day of Remembrance, but how can people who, especially those who want to practice allyship, what can they do to help prevent people from becoming statistics?
And I think that last piece is so important. For a lot of people, it's just a statistic. For us, it could be us. It's our friends. It's those in our community that we know, and we spend a lot of our lives too close to that. So there are a couple of vigils happening. There's one in Sydney, at least, happening on the 21st. Ideally, we would have wanted it on the 20th, but we went for the 21st. At 6 o'clock at St. Teresa's Hall in Sydney on St. Peter's Road. There's a lot of things that allyship can do. So education is really important. So for those who are concerned, educating yourself. If you can't educate yourself or you have questions, find somebody who is willing to answer those questions. And that's a lot of what I do. And I'm perfectly happy to be reached out to be asked some of those awkward questions that people have. Some of the allyship can be really, really simple. The correct use of pronouns is incredibly important and has shown to have a very large reduction in suicides, for instance. But allyship is more than that. It's speaking up for members in a minority community when they aren't present. So if you're wanting to be an ally and you find yourself in situations where conversations are transphobic or phobic to other minorities, speak up for that minority, make that stand. There's a lot of minorities that are affected by all sorts of things, but the trans community in particular suffers really quite high rates of homicide and suicides. So anything that you can do, or anything that anybody can do, just to have those conversations, to use pronouns, to use names, to educate yourself, to stand up for that community.
Firm agree. And I want to jump off on that to note that a key word here is someone who is willing to speak about this, because unfortunately a lot of trans people have suffered traumas and they may not be comfortable talking about their experience like Veronica and I might be.
That's very true. And a lot of trans people want to just live their lives. They don't want to be visible. They don't want to be seen. And I understand that. They've gone through an awful lot. They want the same as anybody else would want, and that's just to live, just to be able to live their lives. But some of us are more than willing to be out, to be visible, and to be doing what we do. So,
Veronica, I have a slightly different question. I know that when growing up, role models are an extremely important part of representation. Did you have any sort of role models growing up, and whether you did or did not, how did that affect you as a person?
that's a really good question. And it's a subject that I do talk about, particularly in STEM fields in the last year anyway. That's why I see visibility as being so important, is because those that are coming up, particularly those that are young, need to know that it's okay, need to see somebody who's succeeded. All too often I see come across youth who aren't sure what to do because their experiences of that they've read about is that trans people lose their jobs, they are discriminated against, they can't succeed, they can't have a good life, and this is where role models become important. I grew up without any role models at all. I didn't know anybody in the queer community until I was 17, and that was one gay guy at college. And it wasn't until comparatively recently, in the last sort of 10 years, I suppose, that I've come across other trans women in some of the places that I've worked. So, no, I didn't have anybody to look up to. I didn't have anybody I could reach out to. I didn't have anybody I could see. Back in the early 90s when I transitioned, we didn't even have, we couldn't Google. We didn't have Google search. We had limited internet. The community that I did find, I found on Internet Relay Chat, an old internet standard. And even that was hard to find because the names of the channels were fairly well guarded to protect those that were there. So for me, that was what, nearly so 34, 30, 20 something, whatever it was, a lot of years before I found anybody else in the community. And I only found out what the name for what I had, so to speak, was because somebody was willing to be highly visible and be part of a documentary on BBC television. And they did that in the early 80s, but I didn't see it until a rerun. I didn't even know what the name, the name that was used at the time was transsexual. That's kind of fallen out of favor now in terms of language and terminology. But as somebody who was growing up as a child, knowing that my gender that I knew myself to be didn't match what others were perceiving me to be based on physical attributes, I couldn't find out what I was, and I had access to good libraries. I just couldn't find it. So visibility and representation is incredibly important.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry I had to deal with that because I grew up also not knowing who I was, but I was fortunate enough to grow up in, even in the 2000s, I remember everyone was still throwing around gay as a slur. And that still guarded me from knowing who I was. And moving forward, I want to talk about what dating, romance, love, and how does that affect trans people, and how can people being accepting, and even in dating spaces, how can that positively affect transgender people?
That's an incredibly complicated and difficult subject. Dating is hard, and I've pretty much given up trying to date. Trans women are already considered to be on the outside of a lot of communities. There are still places where the murder of trans women and others in the queer community can be, they can use the gay panic defense. That's still a legal defense in Canada. So dating can risk the very real threat of homicide. So trans people have to decide fairly early on whether they're going to talk about their history or whether they're going to try and fly under the radar. And I can understand that a lot of trans people would want to just live that life and fly under the radar, but they risk losing their life in some instances. Dating for those within the broader queer community is harder. The queer community is not that big. And certainly in somewhere like Cape Breton, where we have 100,000 people spread out across a rather large geographic area, the numbers are small, and in all likelihood, many of us know everybody else anyway. I really don't have a lot of solution for that or a lot of answers for it. I just know that it's really difficult to do. And hence why I've pretty much given up.
Veronica, I was wondering if there was one thing or even a couple things that you could tell people who are newly realized as transgender, or perhaps transgender youth, or still going through the process of figuring out who they are as a transgender or non-binary individual. What would you like to tell them, especially in the context of Transgender Day of Remembrance and wanting to support them, or generally just support their happiness the best way that you can?
The first thing I would say is that they're absolutely valid. And there are those of us around who are more than willing to do whatever we can to help. There is a community. The community is not particularly public, but there are a lot of us around. There are a number of resources around. The Youth Project, for instance, is a particularly good resource for youth. The Cape Breton Transgender Network has a number of trans people who are willing to help, who meet, who like to socialize, and that's a very valuable thing too. But most of all, be proud of who you are and be yourself.
Thank you for that. Is there anything you would like to share before we wrap up this interview?
Transgender Day of Remembrance is always a very hard one for me. I've lost a lot of friends over the years who are transgender. I've lost friends through conversion therapy too, but that's a completely other story. I would like that as many people would come to the vigil and would also educate themselves. We're not as scary as everybody seems to think we are.
No, I definitely agree with that. We're just people trying to live our lives, honestly.
We're just trying to live our lives.
Thank you so much for joining us, Veronica, and thank you for being willing to be so open and telling your story so that other people can learn and be more accepting. This is Taylor Linloff for Telile. Have a lovely day, and please make sure, if you are able, to attend these Transgender Day of Remembrance vigils.
And now, as promised, here is some commentary from the recent Richmond Municipal Council Committee of the Whole meeting about Remembrance Day services that took place across the county last week. You're also going to hear from District 1 Councillor Sean Samson about the Veterans Banner ceremony that took place, unveiling the banners that have been produced by Royal Canadian Legion Isle Madame Branch 150. And later on in the segment, Councillor Samson is going to talk about how a noise issue at a Branch 150 ceremony from a couple of years ago appears to be resolved at the present time. So let's kick off our special look at Remembrance Day in Richmond County with District 1 Councillor Sean Samson.
I want to acknowledge the banner committee from the Branch 150 Legion here in Ayrshire. That ceremony that took place a few weeks ago was such a great sense of pride and acknowledgement for our veterans and their families and to be honest, our entire community. I urge everybody that can to take a walk from, Dooley's over here to the St. Anne Centre and walk this sidewalk and look at those banners. It's a beautiful sight and a great event and great honor for our veterans. So just want to acknowledge and congratulate the banner committee and everybody involved in that situation.
Well said. They are an incredible addition to the community.
Yeah,
Really
it's
are.
and I'm hearing rumblings already that it's expanding and people are like, how do we get a banner next year? So it's
That's really great.
It's great.
I got the pleasure of hanging the wreath out at the Branch 150, or the honor, I guess I should say, and it was anybody who had the pleasure of being there, seen Elias, 102 years young, very, very chipper, very active, right up until about 3 years ago. We played darts together. So he made a comment that, just a little quick story, but he made a comment. He said, "I remember you from somewhere." And I said, "Yeah, I'm your counselor." And he's like, No. He said, "Somewhere else." I said, "I was at your place last year. I'm your counselor." He said, "Yeah, I know." He said, "But somewhere else." I said, "We used to play darts together." Anyway, I have a picture, and he started to laugh, and he said, "Well, I'm glad you're a better counselor than you are a dart player." I was like, "Thank you very much." But yeah, he's still very active and very strong on his feet for 102 years old. So
That's great.
a shout out to the Legion for, definitely a job well done, and they definitely nailed it this time with.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Councillor Digdon. Shout out, I think, to all of the legions. I know I attended several ceremonies throughout the county, and it was just, it's always an emotional day. And so thank you to the Legion members for their continued activism and making sure we don't forget.
I'd also like to acknowledge and thank our local ATV Riders Club. As you've heard me say, back during COVID, the first COVID ceremony, there was hardly any traffic at our local Legion, and it didn't look like too much was going on at that time. And we had some ATVs pass, through the ATV trail during the ceremony. So that kind of was a sore spot for me. But since that time, our local ATV Riders Association blocks those trails off from 10:45 to 11:45 or so. So that situation will not occur anymore because of these people and volunteering to close those trails. So just want to acknowledge them and thank them for that as well.
And now Telile 24/7 is proud to present the first in our series, Where Are They Now? We're taking a look at people who have made an impact on our area over the years, moved on to a different part of the world, but have continued their public service and their commitment to their communities in their new home. Few people exemplify that better than Paddy Quinn. Some people might remember him as the afternoon and evening host for 101.5 The Hawk's AM predecessor, CIGO 1410 AM, back in the mid to late 90s. But since leaving the Strait area, Paddy Quinn has embarked on a journey that has seen him involved at the highest levels of the provincial government in New Brunswick, and now sees him serving as the Deputy Mayor for the city of Miramichi. I caught up with Paddy Quinn literally just a couple of hours before Miramichi's City Council passed its most recent budget. Here's that interview for our Where Are They Now segment right now. And joining us for the first of our Where Are They Now features here on Telile 24/7, we are pleased to welcome back a voice that many of you got to hear in the mid to late 90s on CIGO AM Radio 1410. Now, the Deputy Mayor of the City of Miramichi, New Brunswick. We're pleased to welcome Paddy Quinn to Telile 24/7. Thank you for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, Adam, it's great to see and hear from old friends again. I appreciate the invitation.
Yes, indeed. And you and I got to meet each other during your time at CIGO 1410. I remember fondly some of the times working there with you under Bob McCackern back when he was running the show. It's now an Acadia broadcasting station. Let's start there if I can, because I get the sense that this was your first full-time radio job, Paddy. What memories do you take from that time, and what were some of the most important lessons you learned from that period of working in radio in Port Hawkesbury?
Well, Adam, look, I could go on for an hour on that one.
Yes.
Look, when I moved to Port Hawkesbury in May of 1996, I knew two people. One was Scott Landry, another colleague of ours. I went to school with him at MBCC Woodstock. Yeah. And may she rest in peace, a lovely lady that I'm sure you're well familiar with, Adam, and have fond memories of. I knew Dorothy Dingle because I grew up next door to her sister here in Miramichi. So I knew two people, packed my whole life into an old Chevy Cavalier and moved to Port Hawkesbury, Cape Breton. And you know what? Still to this day, Adam, zero regrets. As a matter of fact, and although Miramichi is home and it is where I'll likely finish out my time, there are still days, and I have no problem admitting this to anyone, least of all yourself, because there are nights, there are days when I go to bed thinking about Cape Breton, and there are mornings when I wake up still thinking about Cape Breton. It has left its mark on me. I think, Adam, with no disrespect to any of our former colleagues, I had the full Cape Breton experience. I got involved where I could. There was nothing better than a Sunday drive touring around Route 19 or down Richmond County Way on your way to Sydney, down the old road, as we would say, or you folks would say down there nowadays. No regrets. It was the best days of my life, 1996 to the summer of 1999, Adam. And you know what? Still to this day, I can take a long, hard look in the mirror, although things have worked out very well for me. And again, no regrets. There are days where I do kind of miss or regret having left when I did leave. I feel like I left some work undone and maybe would still be there if I had thought things a little bit more thoroughly at the time. But again, funny how things work out. No regrets and nothing but great memories.
And one of the things that really struck me, Paddy, about your time there is you deeply immersed yourself in the entertainment scene. You were a co-host of the Sunday morning show that's still running on 101.5 The Hawk these days, East Coast Rising. Wow. You got to interview a lot of the best of the best, and also a lot of the local up-and-comers as well, too. And can you tell me a little bit about how that fed into who you are and a love of music that still persists to this very day?
Well, you know what? One of the underlying reasons I moved to Cape Breton is my folks. My mother and father, who are still alive today, took me to see Rita McNeil and the Men of the Deeps in 1989 at the Moncton Coliseum when Rita McNeil was, touring the big rooms. And you know exactly what I mean when I say that, playing the arenas and the coliseums of the world. And she spoke and sang so dearly of this idyllic little rock in the sea, as it were. And fast forward to my actual time there, Adam. And I can say this to you because you understand this, and the folks that are living there and went through it. It was the best of times as far as a music fan to be in the radio business. It was just foolishness in the sense that the Natalies and the Ashleys went from parish halls to the world stage seemingly overnight, and then you throw in the Rankins and the Barras and the Ritas who had paved the way, and Matt Minglewood, and then all that came after them, and when they were searching for the next Ashley or Natalie, excuse me, and whether it was a Kaylee at the Creamery or a church hall up Route 19, or Celtic Colors or any of those shows and festivals, Granville Green comes to mind. It was just the best time to be there if you were a music fan. And Nova Scotia and Cape Breton specifically was exploding, as you well know. J.P. Cormier comes to mind, Mary Jane Lamb, and the list goes on and on and on.
Yeah. And I mean, it was even a time for people like Sloan. You get to see the rise of Terry Kelly, Lenny Gallant,
Yeah.
Bruce Guthrow. So, we could be here for another hour talking about some of the people who are making musical headlines there as well, too.
And one, Adam, that you and I both share, because we've had many conversations off the air. And may she rest in peace, too. Laura Smith had that wonderful album in 1997 there. It's a personal thing that was just, it's funny. I would reference that. I was listening to one of her songs on my way into work this morning now, and here we are talking about it. It's funny how things work out.
And one of the best favors you ever did for me was having a scheduling conflict one afternoon where you were supposed to interview Laura Smith for East Coast Rising. And you came to me with an hour to go and said, can you do the interview? So I listened to the album between newscasts, had a little crash course on her second album, but it was one of the most wonderful interviews I've ever had, except for this one, of course. So
yes, there you go.
yeah, exactly. So thanks again for that. 25 years later, we do miss Laura Smith for sure. But let's catch people up from what happened post CIGO. You moved back to New Brunswick. You were involved in radio there for many years. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the greatest memories and opportunities that you got through the 2000s once you came back to your native province?
So I moved home in 1999 to the former 790 CFAN, a heritage AM station here in town. It was originally CKMR, went on the air in the 50s, and moved home to that. Got to live the dream, Adam. When you're in this business or that business, one of the dreams is to go from AM to FM. So it did flip over to 99.3 FM. So got to do that. Worked the country format, which, as you well know, I had zero experience with, but it turned out to be a real treat to be in the country business, because I tell you what, if you've never worked in it, country listeners listen long and listen loyally. So I got to engage with people that I otherwise wouldn't have access to. From there, Adam went into the car business for a while, and then New Cap wanted to start a radio station. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. I went back to 99.3 The River. Okay. So I worked at 790 CFAN, 99.3 The River, 99.3 The River. And then the other dream, of course, when you're in this business, is to go from ground up, as they say. And NewCap put a bid in here to an application, which they were awarded, and we built a radio station. Oh, my goodness, Adam, that was, 2013.
I want to ask you a little bit about not only broadcasting, but also some podcasting that you did. You had your very own podcast that was centering in on the Miramichi area. What led you really start to think this could be my home? This could be where I finish things up for my life, and eventually leading yourself into municipal politics. But what really appealed to you about where you were in that particular part of New Brunswick?
I'd love to give you a real romantic answer, but I think the true answer is that I missed radio, and I missed the microphone, and I missed having chats like this, and it was just. It's never been easier than ever. Like, you need an iPhone and a microphone and someone to talk to nowadays, and you're in business. So I think the ease of it and the missing of the radio business and that sense of communication and that ability to talk. I admittedly was not one of the great broadcasters, but what I always took great pride in doing, Adam, was Miramichi better than anyone around me, and that's what spurned on the podcast. And the interesting thing about the podcasting, it's not for everyone. It kind of defaults to sports, which is one of my great passions in life. But what the interesting thing is, and I can say this to you because you've had these moments with folks who have either read your work or heard your work and are now viewing your work. It's that sense of connection. I get about 10 texts or Facebook messages or emails a week from people that, I'll just use a name, Adam, out in Fort McMurray, a well-known story for you folks at Cape Breton. Halfies are all out west and traveling back and forth. Just that sense of connection. People are reaching out, going, look at, it's just great to hear a voice from home. It's great to hear about some stories from home. It's great to hear about some people from home. Much like you reached out to me today. This is, you have some airtime to fill. I get it, but this is more about reconnecting, and I appreciate that. I appreciate why you're doing it, and I appreciate the feeling of warmth that this is right now. We had some good times together, of course, in the mid to late 90s, and time has not been kind. We haven't seen each other overly frequently, so this has been a great experience.
I'll say this to you: you will never be merely a time filler, Paddy Quinn. I guarantee you that. Let me zero in
appreciate that.
on one other aspect of your life prior to getting into municipal politics, because even while you were broadcasting, you were working to a degree in provincial politics, because you spent some
Yeah.
time working as an assistant to Bill Fraser, who was the Minister of Transportation for New Brunswick at the time. Can you tell me what that experience was like for you?
Hectic for for one
Yeah.
word. Initially, Adam, it was I went over to Fredericton, which is of course the capital of New Brunswick, in the Gallant government. Brian Gallant, that is. Excuse me.
Yes.
We were in tourism, heritage, and culture, which is I don't want to throw you the softball there, but it's a nice post. It's a lot more fun than it is drama, if you know what I mean. You're traveling around, you're visiting all your touristy spots, and then of course there was a cabinet shuffle, and lo and behold, from one night to the next, we were in the Department of Transportation, which, as you know, in any province, let alone New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, is a massive file with a massive staff and a massive budget and a myriad of problems, because no one will ever call you to tell you the road's in great shape. I can tell you that.
Yeah. The sense I've always gotten in Nova Scotia is that the Minister of Transportation is everybody's friend or nobody's friend, and there's no in between.
All at once. There's no gray area there. I totally agree. I had a front row seat for it. But you know what? Been there, done that. No regrets with that one either. But we're going to dial in on municipal politics here. I think once upon a time in the bigger play, Adam, I was pondering, provincial politics. Politics has always been a passion. You and I have had some great conversations over the years, and we've covered some great elections in Cape Breton, Dingwall, the fall of him, the rise of Michelle Dockrell, Joe Clark's visit, and all that stuff. We could go on for hours on that. And I have a good memory, but it's not as great as yours. But I think that was kind of the end game at one point in time, and that was kind of a dipping of the toe in the water, as we would say. But I don't know. Once you see it from that perspective, I think I've had my fill of that, which is why I got really engaged at the municipal level, because it solved two problems very selfishly for myself. I love my community, and I want the best for my community, but I always had a little inkling of politics, so it handles that as well.
So what was the campaign like for you, your first municipal campaign, which turned out to be a successful one for you? You actually got the most votes of any council candidate that was elected at that point. What was that night like for you?
Well, listen, it was a really bizarre campaign. It was during COVID times, in the throes of COVID. We couldn't door to door. There was no hosting of events at community halls. There was no pancake breakfast to go to on a Saturday or farmers markets to go to on a Friday. We were kind of in shutdown. So it was, it was a different campaign. You've covered enough of them. It's all about the groundwork. But this was quite the opposite. There was zero to no groundwork, and it was all emails and texts and Facebook messages and Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook posts, which is good because it's a good skill of mine. And look, it is what it is. The mayor had won by acclamation. No one ran for mayor. We had some great candidates run for the 8 council chairs. And as I knock on wood, I did win one of them, and surrounded by 7 other colleagues. And we have our issues like every community. We have some similar issues that you're well familiar with in your neck of the woods. Although we are separated by lots of highway, the issues are the same. And as we speak today, it's budget day here in Miramichi. Our big vote is tonight, so fingers crossed for that.
I greatly appreciate that you're speaking to me a couple of hours before a budget vote, because we know what kind of difficulty that can be in municipal politics. But you had spoken earlier on, talking about doing the radio work and the podcasting as well, about wanting to represent Miramichi. And Miramichi, of course, is an interesting case in that the city has only been up since 1995. It brings in several areas such as Chatham and Newcastle in that part of northern New Brunswick. So how important was it for you to be able to bring that same passion that you had in your podcasting and broadcasting into municipal politics? You've spoken about the importance of defending those who elected you. So, what kind of priorities do you set for them as deputy mayor and just as a city councilor?
Well, it's interesting. You would reference the fact that we are the product of amalgamation in 1995. The former CFB Chatham was on the brink of closing and relocating, and it's since gone. And then we were left with, what do we do now? Because literally, seemingly overnight, 6,000 people left our town. when I say town, the former towns of Chatham and Newcastle, which would include 3 incorporated villages, Adam, too, of Douglastown, Logieville, and Nelson, if you're familiar with the geography of the region. So it's a geographically big city. It's we have our issues, believe me. Amalgamation at the time was like, whoa, now we're going to be best friends, where once upon a time we competed. But I'm a firm believer in 1995. I'm a more firm believer in 2022 that we are and always will be better together than we ever were apart. I would like to think over time, I mean, the beautiful, mystical, magical Miramichi River, as we love to bill it as around here, you know, as much as that river has been the tie that binds, it has separated us by time as well. You know what, Adam, it's interesting. I could go on again all day. There's a couple of angles to handle this question. You know, we are what we are. We're moving forward. We're a former mill town. The big mill is gone now. We have one vibrant mill. We have our hospital. Some of our other bigger employers, of course, the Federal Pay Service, the Federal Firearms Center. You know, it all happens here in Miramichi, and we're knock on wood, thanks for that. As a matter of fact, I do work for the federal government in my private life. But look, moving forward, we've had overwhelming immigrant growth in the last couple of years. Almost 500 in the last couple of calendar years, which is, you know, if you had told me that a couple of years ago, I would have called you crazy. We have a vibrant Miramichi Regional Multicultural Association who is actively looking for newcomers. We have opened our doors to the Syrian refugees at the time, the Ukrainian refugees. We have some families who are, you know, we were their gateway to Canada. Some have stayed. But we have all the same issues you do here. Again, back to our budget tonight. We have all the same issues that you're experiencing. We have a housing crunch. That's well known. That's well documented in most communities. And the list goes on and on and on.
Well, that's certainly something that we're facing here. As a matter of fact, the town of Port Hawkesbury and Richmond County have both made affordable housing among their top 3 priorities. So that's something that we're working on here in the Strait as well, too. Now, complete the sentence for me, Paddy Quinn. Before I had run for municipal politics, I wish I had known what?
Oh, boys. You know what, Adam? I don't know that I have a one-word answer, but I've used this and I found this out during the campaign, and I still conduct myself as best I can, both personally, professionally at work, and certainly in my service to the community as deputy mayor and councillor. I think without one word, if I could fill this in, what I came to find out, and shame on me, perhaps there's a hint of embarrassment and perhaps shame, more so embarrassment. What I never really accounted for, Adam, is the difference between, I'll just use as an example. So Adam has his issues over here, Paddy has his issues over here.
Yeah.
And sometimes, Adam, that chasm to span between the two of them is so wide where you're like, holy smokes, are we even in the same community? You know, Adam's needs might be more basic. Paddy might like to have a new rink and streets paved, and Adam's just trying to get through the day and get through the week, get through the month. And until you are confronted with it, until you see the reality of the numbers and the statistics, which we certainly have access to, and until you start engaging in all the not-for-profit community organizations that keep the community humming and running, mine and yours, you just don't know. And with a hint of embarrassment, I guess I didn't know, truth be told. Now, the happy accident in all of that is, you know, as you learn, the better person you are, the better citizen you are. And, you know, we have some societal issues here, some socioeconomic issues here right now. We have an addiction problem in our community. Again, not uncommon, I'm certain, Adam, in Richmond, Inverness, Antigonish, and Guysborough counties. But initially, I just didn't know how wide that span was until I got directly involved, and now I have a front row seat for it. And, you know, if I may be so bold as to say this, and I said this a few times, and I always have a hard time with my words, and you're one of the great wordsmiths here, so help me out if you can. If city council, municipal politics, or in county council in your neck of the woods, which is different from here, we do not have county councils in New Brunswick. And you might see this opposite, Adam, and we've had some great conversations over the years, and if you do see it opposite, that's great. But if we could get away from less governance and bylaws and look, at all that stuff matters, I get it. Without laws and bylaws, all is lost. But if we could get away from governance and get into more growing and the social fabric of your community. And it's not all about snow plows and roads being plowed and did we pave Adam Street this year, did we do Bob Street next year, and all that stuff. If you there has to be a balance, but I guess what I'm trying to say here in a roundabout way is I tended to default to more of the community growth aspect of the job more so than the governance, but that's a fine line, believe me, because there has to be a mix of both, obviously.
That's an interesting way to put it, Paddy. And of course, we've seen some municipalities around here trying to take that approach. And I mean, Richmond actually went from 10 councillors down to 5 in the last 2 elections. So you do start to wonder, well, how many people do you actually need to run a rural municipality? And that's part of the overall conversation about whether governance with a capital G is actually getting in the way of serving the needs of the constituents that elected you. So it's interesting to hear you bringing up that point as well, too.
Well, it's timely here too, Adam, and you're a news hound, with all due respect, as am I. Yeah, I mean, you're not in this business without being one of those, but you know, we're going through some municipal reform that's well documented in this province. We have an election here, not specifically Miramichi, but in certain pockets of the province on November 28th, and on January 1st, the map of New Brunswick, as you folks would know it, is changing. And again, it's bringing in all these outlying areas and saying, you're together now. Here's your new name. Here's your budget. And go make her work. And that's a daunting task. Believe me, we have a lot of work to do with our neighbors on the outlying areas. We have some shared issues. We have some differences, and we'll figure it all out here moving forward.
There's a bit of that going on in Nova Scotia. Actually, our friends in the town and county of Antigonish, both municipal councils there, have just voted to consolidate into one unit. That one's been a long time coming. So we understand a little bit about what New Brunswick's going through. It's a much more massive scale than here in Nova Scotia, but we wish you all well in that process as well. Paddy Quinn, we are winding down here. Did you have anything else you wanted to add for the folks watching back in the Strait area just before we wrap it up?
Well, look, and I'm fully conscious and aware of this, Adam. And in preparation, I was giving some thoughts to this. Listen, I was a kid when I moved to Cape Breton. If no one remembers me, there's no offense taken. I was a blip on the radar of some of the great voices and great personalities of the former CIGO and the present 1015 The Hawk. But look, at nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, but fond memories of Cape Breton. I've been back probably 10 or 15 times. I keep in touch with Bob McCachran, who you referenced, yourself, and of course Jason and Denise Samson were as dear friends as I had while I was down there. Miss it daily. Jealous sometimes when I see some of your photos, and I follow some Cape Breton folks on Instagram or whatever, and you see, the Marguerite in the fall and Celtic colors, and look, at again, nothing but fond memories. And someday we'll have a cup of tea real soon, Adam. I promise you that.
Looking forward to it. And the tea is always on here in Cape Breton, Paddy Quinn. Your old friend Rita McNeil, we miss her terribly, and she would want to make sure that the tea is always on, and I guarantee you it's always on for you and your family when you make it through. So in the meantime, it's just been wonderful to catch up with you. Thank you so much for giving me some time here today, especially just a couple of hours before budget night in Miramichi.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Adam. It's again, like I said on the outset, it's always great to see and hear from old friends again, and nothing but fond memories. And it's great to reconnect with you, my friend.
All right, we're happy to have you, and we may have you back before you know it. In the meantime, Paddy Quinn is the Deputy Mayor of Miramichi, New Brunswick. We've been speaking to him via Zoom. And there you have it, folks. That wraps up this week's edition of Telile 24/7. Thank you for tuning in, and a special thanks once again to Taylor Linloff for conducting the interview with Veronica Merryfield. Thank you to Gabrielle, Samson, and Becky Bourinot for producing the footage from the Veterans Banner Ceremony in Arishat. And a special thanks to my interview guest this week for the Where Are They Now segment, Paddy Quinn, the Deputy Mayor of Miramichi. If you have any thoughts about what you've seen or heard over the past hour, or just some suggestions for future shows, feel free to contact me directly. And you can also contact Telile Community Television in Arishat with your thoughts and your suggestions. And don't forget to follow Telile on social media. For now, I'm Adam Cook. Thanks once again for tuning in this week to Telile 24/7. I look forward to seeing you again next week with a brand new show. Bye for now.